Part 64. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 634. Seeing such a lineup, Wang Ling couldn't help but think of the battles in other theaters he had watched from electronic videos a few days ago. At that time, there was an Allied base, and a full 15 light tanks were dispatched to attack Yuri's base. The combined firepower of 15 Prism tanks is indeed extremely powerful. Under normal circumstances, it should be enough to kill a small or even medium-sized Yuri base. However, the defense force of Yuri's base was also very cunning. Even after being beaten to the point of breaking out, they still found a suitable unit and destroyed the group of light tanks. In fact, the reason why the Allied forces failed that time was that the attacking troops were too single and their adaptability was too poor. If they had been equipped with anti-aircraft troops and phantom tanks, Yuri base would definitely have been wiped out in that battle. In the Holy City war zone and the Allied base in the Eastern Castle area, this group of assembled Allied troops has a complete range of types, which makes up for the shortcomings of the previous single unit. If commanded properly, it is not impossible to win. Of course, it's only possible. In fact, Yuri's base on the top of the mountain has been desperately strengthening its defenses in recent days. It is quite large and occupies a geographical advantage. It is very difficult to completely destroy it. However, no matter how difficult it is, this battle must be fought. As for the Allied forces, the army was assembled and then set off collectively under the order of General Reagan. When traveling with a large army, it would be easier if it was a single type of army, but if there were multiple types of arms and types moving together, it would be a lot more troublesome. To be on the safe side, the Allies even dispatched previously manufactured transport helicopters, carrying a group of Allied soldiers and SEALs, and set off first with a group of rocket pilots. Behind them, multifunctional infantry vehicle groups, terror robots, remote control tanks, and phantom tanks also quickly dispatched. Only the Grizzly tanks maintained the same speed as the Prism tanks, acting as a protective force. It has to be said that on the battlefield, the Air Force is indeed very fast. A group of rocket pilots and transport helicopters let go of their speed, and it only took about an hour to reach the edge gathering point in the hilly area. The rocket pilots flew directly in the air and were on standby to do alert work. After the transport helicopter dropped a group of Allied soldiers and SEALs, they turned around and flew back. However, the group of Allied soldiers quickly entered the state and deployed come down and wait for the arrival of other troops in the defense. As for the next type of arriving troops, they were not multi-purpose infantry vehicles. After the deployment of the Allied soldiers, only a few swish sounds were heard, and there were suddenly 5 more Space-Time Legion soldiers in the original open space. Now, still in the stiffening stage after a long-distance move. Which type of arms moves the fastest on the battlefield? This is not the Air Force, nor is it a multifunctional infantry vehicle or an anti-aircraft tracked vehicle. No matter how fast they are, can they move faster than the instant? As long as the Chrono Legion soldiers are within the scope of the map, it can be said that wherever they point, they can arrive in an instant. However, its shortcomings are also too obvious. The further the distance it moves at one time, the longer the stiffness time will be. During this time, the Chrono Legionnaires will have no combat effectiveness. It seems that they were concerned about this, so after the front line troops arrived and deployed, the 5 Chrono Legion soldiers moved over time and space, and spent this stiff time with confidence and boldness under the defense of other arms. Tisk, tisk, this ability to move through time and space is so coveted. Seeing this scene on the electronic map, Wang Ling became greedy again. From the Holy City base to the assembly point, even the fastest Air Force would take nearly an hour to arrive, but with the help of time and space movement, it can be in place in the blink of an eye. Even if there is a moment of stiffness, Wang Ling is very envious. When he proposed the exchange of technology between the two armies, he was actually targeting the Allied Hyperspace Legion soldiers from the very beginning. Although he successfully succeeded, he was put in the second round of exchange. It is not known when it will be realized. Wang Ling, looking at it now, can you not drool? During the time when the soldiers of the Chrono Space Corps were frozen, multifunctional infantry vehicles and terrorist robots from the rear also quickly arrived. Both of these types of troops were also able to move quickly and were not much slower than the Air Force. This large-scale attack by the Allies involved a large number of troops and types of troops. When they were marching halfway, Yuri Base naturally saw that such a large-scale Allied force had obviously already attacked this natural city. The Yuri Base, which has a serious sense of danger, poses a considerable threat. As a result, when the Allied forces had gathered to this extent, more than a dozen tornado tanks and more than a dozen jet tanks suddenly rushed down from the top of the hilly area, with 5 orcs even following behind. Feeling that the force was not enough, 5 more laser UFOs were added, as if they were going to shoot in advance when the Allied troops were gathering. The geographical advantage of the top of the mountain is very obvious. From the top of the mountain to the foot of the mountain, there is a direct sloping mountain road. It rushes down from the top very quickly. As a result, before the next batch of Allied troops arrived here, the front row of tanks had already rushed down the mountain. However, before these Yuri tanks could approach, the 5 terror robots had already noticed this group of enemy troops and ran out without orders. 5 terror robots rushed together at extremely fast speeds. The front row tank reacted temporarily and destroyed 2 of them, but the other 3 had already invaded a Gust tank and 2 Getter tanks, and started from inside. The forcible destruction caused the 3 tanks to continuously shake their bodies, and the health bars above their heads were also reduced to varying degrees. They had just come down the mountain, and before the battle started, they were suddenly attacked by terrorist robots. For this group of Yuri troops who came to attack, it was a big deal. A group of tanks gathered here for a while. At first, they planned to wait for the orcs to arrive and attack together. However, while waiting, 2 Getter tanks exploded, and the terrifying robots that appeared immediately got into other tanks. One of the storm tanks has already lost half of its health. If we wait any longer, the loss will only be greater. Ever since, this group of tanks couldn't wait any longer and started the raid directly. As for the Allied assembly point, the group of Allied troops had naturally noticed the approach of this group of enemy troops. The 5 Chrono Legion soldiers eased their stiffness. After the Yuri tank approached, they divided their work and cooperated, and everyone controlled if you inhabit a Get tank and force it to become stiff, and if it is not rescued for a period of time, it will be forcibly transferred to another world, and in this world it is equivalent to death in battle. Of course, during the control period, the Chrono Legion soldiers themselves could not move or be interrupted. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the rest of the Yuri tanks took the lead in focusing their fire to attack these Chrono Legion soldiers. However, the rest of the Allied soldiers, and even the rocket pilots in the air, had all opened fire. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 635. Choo choo choo. Boom boom boom. Da da da. Before the large Allied troops were assembled, this assembly point had already been reached head-on. All the rocket pilots, tornado tanks, gate tanks and Allied soldiers were sparing no effort to open fire. As for the multi-purpose infantry vehicle with the lowest armor and health, it wisely did not participate in this battle and just hid behind it. Click. Click. Oh ho. In the fierce exchange of fire between the two sides, sacrifices were naturally accompanied at all times. From time to time, tornado tanks and Getter tanks exploded, and Allied soldiers died in battle. Even the soldiers of the Chrono Legion were killed in this battle. Random bombs killed 2 people, and 3 rocket pilots were shot down. However, overall, the situation in this battle still favors the Allies. During the battle, these Allied forces were also very smart. Because our current main combat forces were infantry and flying troops, the first ones to be killed were the Urigat tanks. After a period of bombardment, all the Get tanks were wiped out. Only the Tornado tank remained. This Tornado tank is not very good at dealing with infantry, and it has no air defense capabilities and cannot attack rocket pilots in the air. It will only be a matter of time before it is killed. It happened that at this time, the next echelon of Allied troops, the 7 remote-controlled tanks, had also arrived here, and immediately went into battle, cooperating with other infantry and flying troops. After a fierce battle, all the Tornado tanks were successfully annihilated. Of course, this statement is somewhat inaccurate, because there is still one Tornado tank that is still frozen. This time it is under the centralized control of 3 Chrono Legion soldiers, and the stiff time is naturally greatly shortened. Not long after the war, as a burst of superdimensional fluctuations came out, the last Gust tank was moved to another world, where it was considered dead in battle. As for the terrifying robots that had invaded these tanks from the beginning, not a single one was left, and they all disappeared. Speaking of which, although this terrifying robot is easy to use, it has too many limitations. Successfully invading enemy tanks will certainly make the enemy tired, but during the invasion, if the enemy tanks are attacked and killed, the terrifying robots will not be spared either. It can be said that 3 of the 5 terrorist robots this time were killed by the guns of our own troops. However, General Reagan didn't care about being upset about this, because the following 5 laser UFOs were already approaching here. Under the order of General Reagan, the multifunctional infantry vehicles that had been hiding in the rear directly pushed forward, and a group of rocket pilots followed closely. After the 5 laser UFOs arrived, these air defense forces opened up their firepower and concentrated their efforts. Come and bombard with all your strength. Choo choo choo. Swish swish swish. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. During this period, the laser UFO was naturally counter-attacking. It fired a salvo, killing a multi-purpose infantry vehicle, and then fired at rocket pilots. From time to time, 1 or 2 people were shot down. After the fierce battle continued for a period of time, the 5 laser UFOs ended up being completely destroyed. However, on the Allied side, 3 multifunctional infantry vehicles were also killed, and 5 rocket pilots were shot down. Although he won this battle, General Reagan felt a little unhappy. The air defense efficiency of the Allied forces at this stage is indeed inferior to that of the coalition forces. After the air battle ended, the next echelon of Allied Phantom tanks also came here and gathered in place. Then, the last few wild orcs from Yuri's army also arrived belatedly. They were tall and thick-set, walking like they didn't recognize their relatives, and rushed over without thinking. However, the fate of these wild orcs was relatively miserable. 2 of them were killed by the concentrated fire of the Phantom tanks, and the rest were all handed over to the SEALs, who were all wiped out with one sweep. In order to harass the Allied forces, all the troops sent by Yuri base were wiped out. As more and more Allied troops gathered, the Yuri base seemed to realize that the situation was difficult to deal with, so they simply gave up the idea of harassing them and directly reduced their forces to the base, waiting for what would happen next. The battle faced. Without the harassment from Yuri's base, the Allied troops were happy to be quiet. A group of leading troops waited for a long time after gathering. As the main combat force, the Prism tank finally arrived at the assembly point smoothly under the escort of the Grizzly tank. Now, all the Allied forces have finally been assembled, and now it's time to launch a general offensive. Under the order of General Reagan, these Allied troops gathered for a brief rest, and then set off collectively, sprinting up the hilly road leading to the top of the mountain. As the main offensive light tank, during the sprint, it was like stars holding the moon. It was surrounded by other units in the center, escorting them forward. Gradually we approached the top of the mountain and arrived near the entrance. The Yuri base on the top of the mountain is relatively rogue. Although it does not occupy the entire mountain top area, it has built several defensive buildings at the entrance of the mountain road. And because of the terrain, the defense of the Getter Cannon and the Mind Control Tower, the range is also much further than on flat ground. As a result, the Allied troops had just arrived, and before they could find a suitable location to stop, the two Getter cannons opened fire directly at the rocket pilots. The damage caused by the Getter cannon to the infantry was very considerable. Under the strafing fire from the two Getter cannons, 4 rocket pilots were quickly shot down. At this time, the remaining rocket pilots finally came to their senses and hurriedly retreated a certain distance, only to be able to avoid the air defense range of the Getter cannon. Of course, not only the rocket pilots, but also the frontmost Allied soldiers in the ground troops were also stricken. They accidentally broke into the control range of the Mind Control Tower. As a result, they were mind-controlled before they could recover. And these controlled Allied soldiers, the Allies would not hold back, and they were suddenly killed by the SEAL team behind them in almost the blink of an eye. After the company was controlled and annihilated 5 Allied soldiers, the Allied troops finally couldn't stand it anymore. The light tank in the center did not bother to find a suitable shooting point and opened fire directly on the sloping mountain road. Fortunately, the range of this light tank was long enough. Although the geographical location was poor, the super long range made up for this disadvantage. Hiding outside the defensive buildings, it successively killed the several defensive buildings hiding at the intersection. Yuri's base also failed to cover the entire mountaintop area. After rushing through the mountain road, the subsequent flat mountaintop area became a vacuum zone. It was not within the scope of Yuri's base. There were only 2 slave mines not far away, plus a few tanks and Chinook troops came to garrison. After destroying the defensive buildings at the intersection, the Allied forces filed in and poured into the vacuum. Sweeping powerful firepower, they wiped out all the Yuri guards nearby and blew up 2 slave mines by the way. It's time to clear the place. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 637. After killing Yuri's troops in the mine and bombing the slave mine, the Allied forces were not polite at all. They occupied the Magpie's Nest and came to the mine, using it as the final springboard to gather and consolidate the overall offensive force. After the large forces were assembled and the offensive formation was set up, the large group of Allied forces finally turned their direction collectively and launched a fierce attack on Yuri's troops on the side of the mountain. After all, they had experience in storming Yuri base. Under the real-time command of General Reagan, this group of Allied troops was very flexible and highly adaptable. They hid outside the edge defense buildings of Yuri base and stopped. Then let the light prism tank fire the light prism ray from a long distance, and kill 3 mind control towers, 2 Getter cannons, and a tank bunker. Without this threat, the army continued to advance, gradually approaching Yuri's base. As long as Yuri's troops and buildings could be reached by the prism tank, the entire Allied force would temporarily stop and let the prism tank attack. After such a wretched attack, a hole was soon torn out of the building outside Yuri's base, and a large number of buildings exploded. However, because of this, the Yuri base was furious, changed the situation without changing the medicine, and dispatched a large number of infantry and armored units in a tentative and forceful counterattack. However, some of these Yuri troops were killed by prism tanks from a distance. After barely getting close, phantom tanks, grizzly tanks, remote-controlled tanks, Allied soldiers, and even rocket pilots all opened fire collectively and quickly destroyed them. Wiped them all out. After killing this group of Yuri troops, the Allied troops continued to advance forward and destroyed along the way, causing considerable losses to Yuri's base in a short period of time. Seeing that these Allied troops were about to break into the base, the Yuri base did not care about waiting for anything. In addition to the second batch of Yuri troops being dispatched, there were 3 mind control vehicles, plus 4 magneto-electric tanks, as well. He mingled with the team and tried to eliminate this group of Allied troops in one go. Swish swish swish. Swish swish swish. When Yuri's troops were in large-scale operations, the light prism tanks were certainly not idle. The light prism rays were raging, and any Yuri troops that entered its range would be targeted. The damage caused by the connection would be astonishing. Every building in this area was destroyed, and the incoming Yuri troops were also bombarded on a large scale. This was naturally confused with the mind control vehicles, but after all, they knew the threat of this thing in advance. It can be said that the prism tank focused on targeting this thing, destroying 2 of them before they got close. As for the last one, he handed it over to the remaining remote-controlled tanks, rushed out of the team alone, forcibly exploded it, and used the residual heat to kill those few magneto-electric tanks, and then was killed by the getter machine in Yuri's base. Kill the tornado tanks in the gun and tank bunkers. While the remote-controlled tanks were counter-attacking, other Yuri troops had already forcibly approached this place despite being bombarded by light beams. However, the other Allied escort troops also opened fire collectively, keeping the prism tank firmly behind them. With the prism tank's long-range prism ray, the approaching Yuri troops were unable to touch it. The light prism tanks were wiped out. After all, they planned to attack in a general attack and take advantage of the opportunity to eliminate this Yuri base. The defensive force equipped by the Allies this time is very strong. According to this style of play, it might be possible to kill this Yuri base. Of course, it was only possible. Just when General Reagan was feeling complacent, more than a dozen laser UFOs broke into the Yuri base. In order to deal with the Air Force at Yuri base, the Allies naturally prepared air defense units. The remaining rocket pilots and multifunctional infantry vehicles went up on their own and exchanged fire with these laser UFOs. Choo choo choo. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Swish swish swish. The 3 types of arms fought fiercely in the next period of time. The sound of artillery, missiles, and laser beams continued to be heard throughout the mountaintop area. The battle was fierce. At the beginning, due to their larger numbers, the Allied air defense forces were able to overwhelm the laser UFOs in terms of momentum, and their tyrannical side was revealed as soon as the battle began. However, as time passed, this momentum gradually weakened. Under the counterattack of the laser UFO, a large number of rocket pilots were shot down one after another. When all the rocket pilots were killed, the laser UFO was only beaten. 3 ships were lost. This laser UFO is a trump card weapon of Yuri's army. Whether it is used for offense or defense, it is the best choice. It is very resistant to beatings, and the laser beam attacks infantry, tanks, and buildings. The damage is very considerable. As a result, more than a dozen laser UFOs came out and faced off against the Allied air defense forces. The first ones to be killed were the rocket pilots. Swish, swish, swish. Swish, swish, swish. Of course, the remaining multifunctional infantry vehicles did not give up and continued to launch missile bombardments, while the laser UFO was also unceremonious and continued to launch laser beams. The 2 major types of troops continued to fight in full swing. But in the end, all the multifunctional infantry vehicles were destroyed, but there were 4 laser UFOs left. It's broken. One move is missing, and the whole game is lost. Seeing the scene on the electronic map, Wang Ling's eyelids suddenly jumped. Obviously he had seen the outcome of the battle. Indeed, so far, there are still a large number of Allied troops left, and even the main attack light tank has not been damaged. However, none of these Allied troops has even the slightest air defense capability. In this case, no matter how many there are, they are just living targets. How can we win a battle with no resistance at all? Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Boom. Boom. Sure enough, After taking out the Allied air defense forces, the 4 laser UFOs unceremoniously harvested the remaining Allied troops. And because of their commander's instructions, the laser UFOs gave priority to attacking the Prism tanks. With the attack power of the laser UFOs, the 4 laser UFOs could work together to destroy a light Prism tank in just 2 rounds at most. As a result, under the raging force of these 4 laser UFOs, those light Prism tanks turned out one after another. Explosion, completely without any resistance. During this period, the Allied forces were of course unwilling to give in. They even tried their best to use their remaining energy to storm Yuri's base. They may not have been able to kill a few defensive buildings, but all the light tanks were wiped out. After taking out the biggest threat, the 4 laser UFOs became even more unscrupulous. They fired laser beams indiscriminately. If they picked infantry, they would be infantry, and if they picked tanks, they would be tanks. If they were picked, they would not be able to escape. Once you die, your life will be shot by its laser beam. This was simply a one-sided massacre, and the remaining Allied troops had no power to resist at all. At this time, the Allied forces were in a difficult situation. They couldn't attack Yuri's base by force. They wanted to retreat, but they couldn't beat the laser UFO in terms of speed. It could be said that they were in a dilemma. Either way, they would die. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 638. Lose, lose. The Allied forces mobilized a large number of troops and launched a massive attack, but they still lost in the end. Originally, the Allies were very well prepared for this battle, taking into account long-range, short-range, defense, offense, and even land warfare and air defense. However, they still underestimated the laser UFOs of Yuri's troops. The efficiency of the Allied air defense forces against the laser UFOs was not as good as they expected. The air defense became a shortcoming in the Allied offensive. The shortcoming effect is often mentioned in real society, especially during school years. But in fact, no one is perfect, and one person cannot take care of all aspects. All-rounder is just a fantasy. In society and work life, the height a person can reach is often related to his longest board. There is a direct relationship, so there is also a saying of longboard effect. However, this red alert world is different from reality. Several types of military combinations make up for each other's shortcomings, but the shortcomings in them can kill them when facing the corresponding enemy forces. Just like now, Yuri base has not dispatched all its troops, but after these laser UFOs took out the air defense force of the Allied offensive force, there are only 4 ships left, which is enough to pose a fatal threat to the entire Allied offensive force. This battle did not go to the end, but the defeat of the Allies was already a certainty. However, after all, this battle is not over yet. The Allies still have many ground troops. Now they are in a dilemma at the edge of Yuri's base. After all, these are Allied troops. No matter how ruthless General Reagan is, he doesn't want to let these troops die in vain when he knows they will lose. With these troops, it would be difficult to cause effective damage to Yuri's base during a strong attack, and there would be laser UFOs watching as they retreated. Faced with such a dilemma, General Reagan simply gritted his teeth and divided the troops into 2 groups. A group of Grizzly tanks and Phantom tanks, plus a few Chrono Legion soldiers, quickly retreated back to the base. The other group was the rest of the infantry team. In this situation, they were directly treated as victims, attracting the attention of Yuri base, and stormed Yuri base. However, even with the large Allied forces, Yuri base cannot be wiped out, let alone these dozens of infantry. As a result, when they just got close, several virus snipers started firing cold shots. More than 10 infantrymen exploded one after another, and more than a dozen clouds of virus smoke floated. The remaining infantry did rush to the 2 defensive buildings, but in the blink of an eye, several Allied soldiers were mind-controlled, and the Getter cannon and other Getter tanks quickly counterattacked. As a result, this group of Allied infantry, a total of 8 Allied soldiers and 1 SEAL were controlled, and all the others died in the battle. At such a tragic cost, they were stunned that not even a mind-control tower could be killed. And what will happen to the controlled Allied troops? 5 Allied soldiers were directly stuffed into the biochemical reactor to provide power for Yuri base, and the other 3 were directly sent to the troop recycling station. Obviously Yuri base did not like these Allied soldiers at all. However, the last SEAL remained and was deployed on the edge. Once a war broke out, he would be an out-and-out cannon fodder, but he was just using his remaining heat. As for the group of retreating troops, the Chrono Legion soldiers were the most convenient. They returned to the base with 1 chrono movement and survived safely. But the other tanks were in dire straits. The 4 laser UFOs seemed to be stubborn and ignored the infantry. Instead, they chased and beat these tanks. As an air force, the speed of the laser UFO was always faster than that of the Phantom tanks and Grizzly tanks. As a result, these 2 types of tanks were constantly bombarded by laser beams during their retreat, and one after another exploded. Wang Ling saw the scene in the electronic video, and even wanted to dispatch the Wolf Group's anti-aircraft tracked vehicles to help. However, after estimating the time, it was obvious that the Allied armored units could no longer hold up to the arrival of reinforcements. Buzz buzz. Choo choo choo. Boom. Boom. Sure enough, no matter how these 2 types of tanks retreated, no matter how high their horsepower was, they could never get rid of the laser UFOs. Under the successive laser beams, the number of tanks became less and less. In the end, they evacuated the hilly area, but they could not return half the distance. Have all been solved by laser UFO? At this point, the Allied offensive troops were officially declared defeated. A large number of attacking troops, except for a few Chrono Legion soldiers, were all wiped out in the end. Boom. In the eastern castle area of the Holy War, in the command post of the Allied base, General Reagan saw the last tank explode. He was so angry that he couldn't help but smash the control panel. Damn it, damn it. Even though you were so well prepared, you still lost. Why is the Lee base so difficult to attack? A deputy beside him responded, yes, the defensive power is too strong, whether it is strategy or attack, it is too difficult. Another deputy asked, but the Yuri base at the bottom of the mountain is easy to attack. The troops are far inferior to this time, and they can successfully attack it. Why is it so difficult at the top of the mountain? It's different. The Yuri base at the top of the mountain occupies a favorable location, and there has been a precedent of the destruction of the first 2 Yuri bases. Now we are afraid and have strengthened our defenses desperately. Of course, it is difficult to attack. Moreover, when attacking the Yuri base at the foot of the mountain, the coalition forces also stepped in to help and eliminated the deadly threat for us. Otherwise, it would not have been so easy. We were actually fully prepared for this attack on Yuri base on the top of the mountain, but the air defense efficiency has become a shortcoming. It's not easy to fight head-on, if the coalition's anti-aircraft tracked vehicles can be dispatched. SHHH. The deputy was quite honest. He talked about this situation without any hesitation and told the truth. However, when he said this, the other deputy quickly made a silent movement. After understanding the situation, the deputy immediately covered his mouth and glanced at General Reagan secretly. Sure enough, he found that the old general's originally ugly face was now even more distorted. Compared with the embarrassment in the Allied command post, the coalition command post was a different scene. After seeing the defeat of the Allied forces, Rovitsky clicked his tongue and sighed, even after deploying so many troops, it still doesn't work. Zhao Pingwang also nodded and said, yes, the Allied forces have suffered from the effectiveness of air defense this time. After the anti-aircraft firepower was removed, there is no way to use the air force of Yuri base. I am thinking, if we and the Allies jointly attack, will we successfully capture Yuri base? Rovitsky thought for a while and replied, I can't say that we can definitely capture it, but at least the possibility is greatly increased. We can just make up for the shortcomings of air defense efficiency, and then Wang Ling will defend together with other Allied troops. When the Prism tank attacks, no matter how strong Yuri's base is, it will be difficult to parry it. What we can think of, the Allied forces should also be able to think of, right? Why didn't you say hello to us before gathering? Zhao Pingwang was a little puzzled for a while. But at this time, General Li Wiki sneered and said mockingly, this is the price of arrogance. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 639. The Price of Pride. Hearing what General Li Wiki said, Zhao Pingwang and Rovitsky were thoughtful, but did not immediately understand. General Li Wiki then asked, do you think our coalition is stronger, or the Allies? Of course it's our coalition forces, Rovitsky replied without thinking. Zhao Pingwang is more rational. I admit that some of the Allied forces' technologies are indeed more advanced than ours, such as hyperspace, spy satellites, and light prism technology. But in terms of combat effectiveness, I still don't accept them. Of course, in a head-to-head confrontation, our coalition forces are stronger. That's it. General Li Wiki smiled playfully and explained, this is our idea. Correspondingly, of course the Allies also think that the Allies are stronger. Reagan, this old guy, is too arrogant. Seeing that we are just using our own, he killed the Yuri base on the mountainside with his own strength, which probably stimulated him a lot. He must have thought that Yuri base on the mountaintop didn't need our help and they could take care of it on their own. After hearing this, the two of them suddenly understood, but King Xiaoping was still asking, that's what you said, but after all, we informed them when we attacked the mountainside base. It's good for them, why didn't they even give a symbolic invitation? No. General Li Wiki crossed his arms, his expression unchanged, so, this is the price of arrogance. He, the old Reagan guy, refused our invitation when he attacked the Yuri base on the mountainside. Now of course he can't lose face by attacking the base on the top of the mountain. Come and let us know. What's more, they can kill the mountaintop base on their own. With this record, there's no telling what else they can do. Tisk tisk. You are really proud. However, arrogance must also have the confidence to be proud. This is great. Instead of being able to shout, it caused heavy losses to the Allies and left us a joke. Luo Wei Sky shook his head, sneered, and then asked, General, when will we prepare to attack? Mentioning this, General Li Wiki's eyes seemed to flash with a light, it's almost. I got the news very soon. Compared to the commanders and deputies of both the coalition and allied forces, Wang Ling was relatively calm. He already knew the result from the very beginning when he saw the air defense force of the allied offensive force was annihilated. After sighing a few times, he returned to normal. Victory or defeat is a common thing in the military. In Red Alert, it is not uncommon for people to be annihilated due to failure to attack, and Wang Ling has seen too many. If it was his own coalition forces, he might feel sorry for a while, but he didn't care too much about the Allies. After the battle, he watched the 4 laser UFOs return to Yuri's base like heroes, and then closed down. I dropped the electronic video and continued to stay at the base to rest. On this day, except for the battle between the Allied forces and Yuri's troops, there were no other events. That night, Wang Ling returned to the real world safely. In the past few days, the real world has been relatively stable. During the internship training period, the roommates stayed with Wang Ling on campus and had fun until late every night. Of course, this is only relatively stable, and the time is very short, only 1 week. That night, several friends returned to the dormitory, but they did not see Sun Tongtong again. Originally, Wang Ling subconsciously thought that they were going to turn on the computer and continue having fun, but unexpectedly, after returning to the dormitory, they immediately put the computer away, stuffed it into their handbags, and then started packing their things. Only then did Wang Ling realize that the week of training was over. When I was going through it, I didn't feel much, but after it was over, I felt like the time passed a little too fast. Seeing them busy packing their things, Wang Ling felt a little at a loss and sat blankly on his bed, feeling quite mixed in his heart. Tomorrow, these bad friends will leave for the capital for internship. If there is nothing else, they will be there for half a year. Although Wang Ling was often alone in the dormitory before, these lost friends would often come back for reunions, but after tomorrow, for up to half a year, they may not be seen again. Thinking of this, Wang Ling suddenly felt a trace of regret deep in his heart. If there was no interdimensional system in his life, would he also pack up his things at this time and prepare to leave school tomorrow? Looking at the looming bracelet-like interdimensional system on his wrist, Wang Ling couldn't help but feel a little emotional. Perhaps because of the habits he picked up from the troops in the Red Alert world, Wang Ling is also particularly emotional now. Thinking back to the time when he had to leave his comrades because of the so-called battlefield phobia, Wang Ling cried. When he left Xiaohei from the police dog training base, Wang Ling cried. When he learned that Xiaohei had starved himself to death in order to wait for him, Wang Ling cried. I cried too. This kind of separation lingers in my heart, which is inevitably a bit sour. Thinking of Xiaohei, Wang Ling turned to look at the kennel. Xiaohei has now been resurrected in a unique life form with the help of the system, and is even called Brother Hei by those bad friends. Seemingly realizing that they were about to leave, Xiaohei stayed by the kennel, squatting and watching them all the time, with some reluctance in his eyes. However, it is not as deeply attached to Wang Ling as it was in the Red Alert world, refusing to let him go until death. After noticing Wang Ling's gaze, Xiaohei even barked twice, came to Wang Ling's side, and rubbed Wang Ling's leg with his dog's head. Hearing the barking, these bad friends subconsciously looked at Wang Ling. Sensitively aware of their mood, Wei Bowen actually joked, Wang Ling, please don't treat me badly while we are away, Brother Hei. If he loses weight after we come back, be careful we stew him. Woof woof. Roll. This guy really never forgets to make a joke no matter the occasion. One sentence actually caused Wang Ling and Xiaohei to curse him back at the same time. Dongfang Yuking, on the other hand, was more sincere. Since when have you missed us? Why don't you just go to the capital to find us when you have time? There's no need to be so sad. It's not like you can't see us anymore, right? That's true. Boys' houses usually have less things to pack. Except for Dongfang Yuking's stuff in the dormitory, which is a bit more troublesome, Zhang Shenkei and Wei Bowen finished packing it quickly, leaving only the bed. This was planned for the internship. The apartment was bought again. What's next? After hesitating for a moment, the two people took out the computer without bothering. While turning it on, they complained, why are you cleaning up so early? We still have to move it out. But no, when we get to the apartment and clean up, the first thing we do is to set up the internet. Without the internet, we can't live. Wang Ling looked at the words and deeds of these two people, and he couldn't laugh or cry. Isn't this just rubbing his crotch? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 640. Get on the road. Help me. Is this dog sword master still a bit more doggy? Gather, let's fight the dragon. Push the tower. Zoom in and kill him in seconds. Pretty. In the following period, the shouts of these few pieces of material playing games were frequently heard in the dormitory. It was really lively. Even Dong Fangyuking, who had finished cleaning up, joined in for the last indulgence before leaving. However, this indulgence did not last long. After a few hours, the four of them went to the cafeteria to eat something simple. After returning to the dormitory, they washed up and lay down on their respective beds. Tonight, they didn't play too late, but they didn't go to bed too early either. Instead, they lay in bed and chatted non-stop. We keep chatting, how can we have so much to say? In fact, most of the time these people were just looking for something to talk about. In short, no one wanted to just fall asleep. In this way, we continued chatting until very late, until we stopped talking. Then we realized that some of them couldn't hold on anymore and fell asleep temporarily. Then it ended and everyone closed their eyes. On this night, Wang Ling rarely entered the world of Red Alert again. After training in that world for a long time, staying up late to fight has become commonplace. Wang Ling is not too sleepy now. He lies on the bed and is in a daze. Even he himself doesn't know what he is thinking. Hello. While he was thinking wildly, Zhang Shenke suddenly said something in his sleep. Wang Ling was stunned when he heard it, and then he couldn't laugh or cry. This guy is really dedicated. Is he working as a customer service person on the phone in his dreams? After laughing, Wang Ling also sighed. Feeling sleepy, he stopped insisting. He closed his eyes and slept until dawn. After a week of continuous training, and the internship is about to begin, sleeping in may have become a luxury in the days to come. Those bad friends also woke up early intentionally or unintentionally, even if they yawned all day long, they got up early this morning. I woke up early, packed some things after breakfast, and sat in the dormitory to wait. Waiting until it was nearly 8 o'clock, the three of them each carried their packages. Even Wang Ling also joined hands and arrived at the school gate together. Now here, those who are going to be interns have all gathered in large and small bags, and there are also many people like Wang Ling to see them off, and the scene is very lively. After a short wait, the school bus finally arrived. Wang Ling helped the three of them take Sun Tong Tong with them, load their luggage onto the bus, and then watched the bus leave with his own eyes. After the bus left, the rest of the farewell personnel did not stay long and dispersed. Only Wang Ling stood at the door and looked at the direction the bus was leaving. After a long time, he sighed leisurely, "Let's go." All gone. While sighing, Wang Ling smiled bitterly and shook his head. In the end, he was the only one left in this four-person dormitory. Fortunately, Wang Ling had long been accustomed to this kind of life. After sighing, he didn't show too much pretentiousness, turned around and embarked on the return journey. Regardless of whether Wang Ling admits it or not, his time in the Red Alert world has gradually exceeded that of the real world, and his experiences in the Red Alert world are far richer than those in the real world. There seems to have become Wang Ling's second living world. And with this different dimensional system, no matter how low-key he is no longer in the same world as others. As for what this phenomenon portends and what it represents, whether it is a good thing or a bad thing, it is really unclear to Wang Ling. In other words, he has not reached that level yet. Although with the help of the extra-dimensional system, Wang Ling is now a bit strong, but after all, he has not reached the highest level of enhancement. At least the advanced physical fitness enhancer, Wang Ling still dare not try easily. After returning to the dormitory, Wang Ling's life returned to its previous normality. The departure of several roommates has become a thing of the past for Wang Ling. From now on, in the real school, the only people who can accompany him in the school in real life are those familiar and familiar ones. Among the unfamiliar pricks, the only one left was Xiaohe. As usual, the day passed quickly. That night, Wang Ling returned to the Red Alert world and slept in his temporary command post for the night. Since the capture of Yuri base on the mountainside, Allied forces in the Holy City war zone have continued to move, large or small, while Yuri base is constantly consolidating its defense forces, expanding its base and guarding troops. However, the coalition forces have always stood still and recuperated. This has continued until now, which has been a long time. On this day, while Wang Ling was patrolling the base, he finally received an order from the command post, asking all captain-level personnel to go to the command post and hold a temporary combat meeting. After waiting for so many days, is it finally here? After Wang Ling received the news, he squinted his eyes and felt a bit of anticipation in his heart. This group of officers and soldiers moved very quickly. After the order was issued, the corresponding personnel quickly assembled in the command hall of the command post and performed military salutes with each other. At this time, General Li Wiki asked, "Everyone, you have been resting for a while, have you rested enough?" "Report to the general, you have had enough rest," the person who answered was Chen Tong. Since the last exchange of combat experience with Wang Ling, this guy has always wanted to test Yuri's troops for himself. Others, including Wang Ling, who he represented, simply did not answer anything. General Li Wiki smiled and asked, "Do you know why you have been holding back your troops these days?" This question stumped them. After taking a look at each other, Sun Dehua, Hu Ben and other team captains simply answered matter-of-factly, "Report to the general, I don't know." General Li Wiki didn't find it strange, but asked Wang Ling alone, "What about you?" Regarding this question, let alone Wang Ling, he had really thought about it before. At this time, he thought for a moment and tentatively answered, "Probably, it's because the new military unit is about to be developed, right?" "Haha, that's right." General Li Wiki smiled, and then while operating the control panel, he said, "Come and take a look at this." Under his control, a video appeared in the electronic video area. In this video, what appears is a heroic helicopter. This kind of helicopter, unlike the Allied transport helicopters, seems to have thick armor and can stay in the air for a long time. At first glance, it looks like a ferocious bird of prey hovering. It turned out that what General Li Wiki showed them was a test video of a new type of military unit. In the video, after hovering in the air for a while, the helicopter suddenly received an attack order, quickly flew to the target area, and fired forcefully at a fortification on the ground. Only a burst of machine gun sound was heard. This seemingly solid fortification was quickly drained of its health bar, and then exploded. Then, in the video, in front of the shocked faces of Chen Tong and others, the helicopter slowly landed on the ground, quickly changed its shape, appeared on a solid base, retracted all its wings, and peeked out of the fuselage. A large caliber, ultra-long barrel emerged. Different dimension red alert world. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 641. Oh. This helicopter is awesome, and it has a second form change. Is this a helicopter or a cannon? Why does it have such a long barrel after deployment? And this kind of helicopter? It's amazing. In the previous New Arms Research and Development meeting, various recorded new arms research and development plans were not disclosed. Chen Tong and the others did not know about this new arms yet. When they saw this new helicopter from the electronic video, one by one all a little surprised and pleasantly surprised. Boom! Boom! When they were surprised, in the video, the helicopter opened fire directly after deployment. A large shell was fired from the long barrel, and it accurately hit an experimental building in the distance. Kill it immediately. The video ended here, but after watching the video, Chen Tong, Sun Dehua, and others had their mouths opened in an O shape. They were obviously shocked, but Wang Ling was the calmest and unmoved. After they calmed down, those few people went crazy. My dear, my dear, my dear. Be a good boy. This damn helicopter can really fire. What kind of helicopter is this? Why is it so awesome? With such a long range and such strong destructive power, This is simply a small Allied cannon. Haha, did our coalition steal the Allied cannon technology? How did we create such a terrifying thing? That's amazing, my brother. There is such a helicopter. General Lewicki was right in front of them, but they were so surprised that they couldn't care less and expressed their surprise in various languages. However, General Lewicki didn't mind this. He smiled and waited until they had passed the freshness period before introducing him. This helicopter is called an armed helicopter. As you can see from the video, this kind of armed helicopter is closely related to the Alliance. The transport helicopters of the Army are essentially different. They have no transport capacity, but they have very powerful combat capabilities. They can exist in the form of Air Force and can also be deployed as giant cannons. Although this so-called giant cannon sounds very similar to the Allied giant cannon, but in fact, the armed helicopter was purely developed by our military personnel and has nothing to do with the Allies. Ha ha ha, what a good thing. With this kind of armed helicopter, wouldn't our coalition forces be even more powerful? Sun Dehu smiled happily. General Lewicki also nodded and said, that's right. Our coalition had lacked air force before and relied on Kirov airships to support the field. However, Kirov airships have poor maneuverability and are difficult to move flexibly on the battlefield. But armed helicopters, the advent of the helicopter has made up for the shortage of coalition air force. Why have I been standing still before? To put it bluntly, it is because this armed helicopter has entered the final testing stage and is waiting for the final production technology. And last night, the Military Industry Department finally completed. We passed all tests and delivered the production technology to all coalition bases overnight. Having said this, General Lewicki looked at Wang Ling alone and said, the advent of armed helicopters is indeed a milestone and progress for our coalition forces. However, this type of arms is not a perfect arm. Wang Ling, armed, you originally proposed the design concept of the helicopter. Now it's up to you to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of this thing. Oh. Wang Ling proposed it? Others were even more surprised when they heard this statement, and looked at Wang Ling with wide eyes. Wang Ling had long been accustomed to this kind of gaze and didn't care at all. He took the topic naturally and explained, indeed, there is no perfect military unit, and armed helicopters are no exception. The advantages of this type of military unit are shown in the video. It has also been shown that it can be used for air defense, and can also be deployed as a cannon for long-range bombardment, but the corresponding limitations are not small. First of all, in terms of attack power, it is relatively lacking. The attack power of an armed helicopter in flight is actually not much higher than that of an Allied rocket pilot. An armed helicopter may not be able to kill a car in single combat. Special tanks mainly rely on quantity to win. Although the cannon form on the ground has a long range, it has a strong restraint effect on infantry and light armored tanks, but for armored units with medium or heavy armor, it will be difficult to deal with them, and they must be suppressed with concentrated fire in numbers. Otherwise, the cannon of an armed helicopter, bombarded at the extreme distance, will not be able to kill two grizzly tanks, and they will quickly approach and kill them. Having said this, Chen Tong and others, who were still excited, frowned slightly. But Wang Ling hasn't finished speaking yet. In addition, this armed helicopter is a unit with a mind. When deployed, Yuri can also control its mind. This is the most important point to pay attention to. You must be careful when fighting. Pay close attention to the mind control vehicle in Yuri's base. Once you find the mind control vehicle approaching, you must first focus all your firepower to kill it. Otherwise, use the high armor of the mind control vehicle to forcefully bombard the cannon-shaped armed helicopter that is approaching. It only takes one to destroy the entire group of armed helicopters. In addition, you also need to pay attention to the magneto-electric tanks. Although the armed helicopters look larger after deployment, they are actually not too heavy. The magnet-electric tanks can also be controlled and adsorbed from a distance. And once it is absorbed, you can imagine what the results will be based on the previous battles. Whether it is a game or the world of Red Alert, there are no perfect military units, so there is a way of fighting each other. Armed helicopters naturally have a series of shortcomings. These are the limitations of using armed helicopters in Wang Ling's memory. At this point, Wang Ling didn't expect any more information for a while, so he simply stopped explaining. After the others heard this, their original excitement had already cooled down. Chen Tong immediately asked, with such huge limitations, how useful can the armed helicopter be in combat? Is it still worth looking forward to? Wang Ling smiled, nodded, and said, of course it's worth looking forward to. Don't just look at the negative side of things. In fact, because of the unique defense method of Yuri Base, the coalition forces have very few effective means when attacking Yuri Base. And this armed helicopter is a great weapon for the coalition forces to attack Yuri Base. In fact, based on Wang Ling's game summary, there are only two types of arms that are most suitable for the coalition forces to deal with Yuri Base. One of them is armed helicopters, and the other is himself, the elite combat soldier. However, the main topic here is armed helicopters, and Wang Ling did not deliberately seek the sense of superiority. Later, Wang Ling continued, I just mentioned that armed helicopters mainly rely on quantity to win. Quantitative changes lead to qualitative changes. When the number of armed helicopters reaches a certain level, the concentrated firepower of Yuri Base will also have to be a headache. Of course, you also have to cooperate with tricky command and find the right time to use it. Just like the remote-controlled tanks of the Allied forces, which were themselves powerful weapons against Yuri's troops, but they were just developed and had no experience in using them. They went to attack Yuri Base. Didn't it turn out that even the defensive buildings at the intersection couldn't be demolished? Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 642. In fact, the Allies have sent remote-controlled tanks to attack Yuri Base several times before, not only because of the novelty of this new type of arms, but also for testing and positioning. After all, no matter which new type of arms comes out, it must go through the test of blood and fire before it can find its correct position on the battlefield. No matter how harsh the training for new recruits in the training camp is and how high their combat effectiveness is, in the eyes of veterans, they are still just rookies. However, now, in order to illustrate the importance of command, Wang Ling just gave an example of a remote control tank, and by the way, he hacked the Allies. Although the two armies have joined forces and are not considered enemies now, the coalition still likes the Black Allies very much. After hearing Wang Ling's statement, Chen Tong and others suddenly realized. At this point, Wang Ling had nothing to say for the time being. Then General Li Wiki spoke up, now, you have also heard about the introduction of armed helicopters. However, what you have learned on paper is shallow. You have not experienced actual combat. The coalition forces are still unfamiliar with the use of armed helicopters. Therefore, I stood still and waited for the formal development of armed helicopter technology before starting this combat meeting, in order to use this battle to become proficient in armed helicopters. As he spoke, General Li Wiki looked at Wang Ling again and asked, Wang Ling, you don't know where you got all this combat experience. You can even come up with the design concept of an armed helicopter and know its disadvantages, then you should be familiar with the use of armed helicopters, right? Wang Ling smiled confidently and replied, General, I am very familiar with it. Leave this battle to me. Okay, General Li Wiki nodded with satisfaction. General. However, before he could say the next words, Chen Tong suddenly interrupted. How? Report to the General, Chen Tong, on behalf of the Eagle Group, requests to go to war. Chen Tong also wants to participate in the battle. To be honest, Wang Ling had continued to perform meritorious service on the front line before, and he was present in every battle. Although Chen Tong was convinced, he also had his own pride after all. As an elite leader of the coalition, he had always stayed at the base to defend. I was unable to participate in front-line combat. After a long time, I finally couldn't hold it in anymore and wanted to join the war. However, General Li Wiki did not want him to fight and refused directly, no, refused to fight. General, but Chen Tong still didn't give up, they are both coalition forces, and they are also field teams. The Eagle team is no worse than the Wolf team. Why do we always stay on the defensive line and defend passively, while the Wolf team always can different soldiers be sent to fight? When it comes to experience in dealing with Yuri, I am indeed not as good as Wang Ling, but I have asked Wang Ling for advice a few days ago. You also know that what you learn on paper will always be shallow. These combat experiences, I don't want it to be just empty talk. Wang Ling didn't look down on us, but there were some ruffians under the Wolf group who privately called us weak and could only hide in the defensive line. Who can bear this? So General, we Eagles the team also needs a battle to rectify our reputation and at the same time increase the combat effectiveness and combat experience of the soldiers. In order to ask for a fight, Chen Tong went all out this time. Wang Ling was surprised by the weak thing he mentioned, because even he didn't know about it. It's no wonder that Chen Tong took the initiative to ask for a fight this time. On the one hand, he couldn't hold it in any longer. On the other hand, such remarks were too irritating to him. Cough. Facing Chen Tong, who was already a little emotional, General Li Wiki sighed and expressed his true thoughts. Chen Tong, you are also my old subordinate, even much earlier than Wang Ling. I know your thoughts and understand your mood. But this is a battlefield, and it cannot be controlled by emotions. Why haven't I let the Eagle Group go to battle? Because the enemy we face is very special. When we attack Yuri base, the firepower of the Allied forces is severely limited. You saw the last attack by the Allied forces. Almost the entire army was wiped out. Although there are sacrifices in war, but you old subordinates, I don't want to see any of you die in battle. At this point, General Li Wiki suddenly pointed at Wang Ling, but why do I keep asking Wang Ling to fight? Because Wang Ling has a special type of military and has many clever ideas. He is the most suitable candidate to deal with Yuri base. The most important thing is that this guy is like an invincible little strongman, no matter he wins or loses, he can always bring back the troops to the maximum extent, so I can feel more at ease when I send him out. The invincible Xiaoqiang, Wang Ling pointed to his nose, as if he was aggrieved. General, you are trying to appease Chen Tong by demonizing me. If I am seriously injured, I will die, okay. Puff. This originally serious scene suddenly became a little funny when Wang Ling disturbed it. Sun Dehu and other Wolf team captains couldn't help but burst out, and even Xiaoping Wang and Luo Weisky couldn't laugh or cry. General Li Wiki glared at Wang Ling, and then looked at Chen Tong. Okay, let's not mention this matter again. As expected, Chen Tong didn't speak anymore, or even responded. But his face was full of disappointment, as if his self-esteem and self-confidence had been hit hard. Wang Ling saw this scene, but he couldn't bear it anymore. After thinking about it for a while, he simply suggested directly, General, it's just like what you said. What you see on paper is ultimately shallow. I also think that Chen Tong can participate, and you should also participate in some battles with Yuri to accumulate some experience. Wang Ling. Why did you even say that? General Li Wiki was a little dissatisfied. But Wang Ling replied, General, I know what you are worried about, so I will also participate in the battle according to the previous combat methods. Chen Tong can lead some members of the Eagle Group to participate, but I also have a condition, you must obey my orders. After hearing this, Chen Tong was pleasantly surprised, but also a little hesitant. Out of his trust in Wang Ling, General Li Wiki stared at Wang Ling for a long time before finally replying, "There's really nothing I can do about you." "Well, just like you said, Chen Tong is allowed to obey orders. Join the war. And Chen Tong, don't look so reluctant. If Wang Ling wants, he can be separated as an independent commander at any time, and his military rank is just one step away from Major General. His position and military rank are both higher than you are tall, and it is not unfair for you to obey his orders." "Yes, General." After such enlightenment, Chen Tong finally looked away, regained some of the sunshine and confidence of the past on his face, and even cast a grateful look at Wang Ling. After finally dealing with this stubborn guy, General Li Wiki breathed a sigh of relief. However, when he looked at Wang Ling from behind, he became worried again. "Now let's talk about your matter, Wang Ling. Judging from the behavior of the Yuri base on the mountainside after the last capture of the Yuri base on the mountainside, they have obviously paid attention to it. As for your threats, if you show up, I'm afraid you will continue to be targeted, so even if I send you to fight this time, I am a little worried." After hearing this, Wang Ling smiled and replied, "General, I have also thought about this problem. It may have been a bit difficult before, but after the emergence of armed helicopters, this problem no longer exists. I have a fishing here. The plan can be implemented." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 643. Fishing Plan? What kind of plan? Upon hearing this statement, General Li Wiki and others became interested and urged Wang Ling to explain. Wang Ling did not maintain too much mystery. He smiled confidently and explained his so-called fishing plan in detail. It's no wonder that even General Li Wiki said that Wang Ling has a lot of bad ideas. This guy has summarized and thought about a lot of bad ideas in the game. In addition, the infantry and armored units in this Red Alert world are all independent units. It is convenient to command, and even methods that are difficult to operate in the game are now possible in the Red Alert world. When he was telling about this plan, the eyes of General Li Wiki, Xiaoping Wang, Raoski, and others were a little bright. After he finished speaking, General Li Wiki smiled wildly. "Okay. It seems that I was worried for nothing. You have too many bad ideas, and Yuri's troops will have a headache when they catch up with a pervert like you." Even Chen Tong marveled. "I didn't expect that you, who looks so serious, could come up with such unorthodox ideas. No wonder the general asked me to obey your orders. You have so many clever ideas." As a result, Wang Ling became a little unhappy, and his face darkened. What is a bad idea? What is an improper idea? A good idea is one that can win the battle. As long as it is worthy of one's conscience, what plan cannot be used? He's in a hurry. Haha, he's still in a hurry. As a result, Xiaoping Wang and Raoski laughed. Wang Ling was helpless and simply stopped bickering. He just emphasized, "General, this plan itself is designed based on our own strong firepower. The ground troops can say no matter what. With me, Apocalypse tanks, Yuri troops, it's hard to do anything to us. The main thing is the laser UFO. Last time they chased me like a grandson, they will definitely target me this time, so our anti-aircraft firepower must be strong, and we can't follow in the footsteps of the Allies. Needless to say, there is no need to talk about the anti-aircraft crawlers. There must be more of these armed helicopters." "Oh? How many gunships do you want?" 20 aircraft start." "So much?" General Li Wiki's brows jumped when he heard this number. After all, the technology of this armed helicopter has just come out, and it has not been used in actual combat on any battlefield, so it is not clear its specific value. However, Wang Ling started with 20 aircraft, which is of course surprising. However, out of trust in Wang Ling, General Li Wiki did not refuse, and even said, "Okay. I will give you 25 armed helicopters, and 10 more will be manufactured and deployed on the defense line. You can mobilize them at any time." Very good, Wang Ling felt happy after hearing this. Although he is still nominally the leader of the Wolf Group under General Li Wiki, he still has his own command post and has the authority to use the tank factory to manufacture armored units. But don't forget, manufacturing tanks and helicopters all costs combat funds. He, Wang Ling, is indeed half a commander, but the funds in the temporary base were spent too much in the early stage of defense. Although he has been saving them through several mine trucks and 2 oil fields these days, his foundation is weak after all. If you build armored units on a large scale, you can't afford it. But it's different here with General Li Wiki. This red alert world is not a game after all. The command post took away all the funds when the battlefield was moved several times, which in itself was a huge sum of money. More importantly, as long as the oil fields occupied in each map are not destroyed, they will continue to generate funds. Especially on the decisive battlefield, the number of oil fields occupied is not a small number, and it is almost an endless stream. Transferring funds. Wang Ling was reluctant to spend his little money, but he was quite at ease with instigating General Li Wiki. After the fishing plan was arranged, General Li Wiki issued an order to the tank factory in front of Wang Ling and everyone else to manufacture 35 armed helicopters as quickly as possible. After the order was issued, the meeting continued. The follow-up meeting was mainly to discuss the detailed offensive plan. After all, there were 2 offensive experiences. Nothing worthy of attention came up in the follow-up meeting, and it ended smoothly after a while. After leaving the command post, the other team captains had dispersed. Only Chen Tong was still beside Wang Ling. He even gave a serious military salute. "Sir Wang Ling, please give me your advice." Wang Ling couldn't laugh or cry, so she punched him in the chest and cursed, "You, mother-in-law, are doing this, don't you treat me as a comrade." Haha, Chen Tong couldn't hold it back and laughed. After laughing, he said seriously, "Wang Ling, brother, thank you." It can be seen that Chen Tong has been holding in the defense line for too long these days. Wang Ling is willing to help him ask for a fight in this meeting. Even if he follows Wang Ling and obeys the order, he is very grateful. Wang Ling is gone. Now, the attack plan has been decided. However, after all, the armed helicopters are not in place yet and the offensive will not be launched in a short time. Wang Ling and others simply have to be patient and continue to wait for this period of time. The speed of the tank factory was not too slow. After Wang Ling left the command post and waited for a while, the roof above the tank factory was opened, and an armed helicopter flew out, staying nearby. Near the car factory, I always keep flying even if I am not tired. This thing appeared for the first time in the entire Holy City war zone. As soon as it appeared, it immediately attracted the attention of all the coalition forces. Many officers and soldiers unanimously turned their attention to the armed helicopter in the sky, and many people opened their mouths. The O shape shows the degree of surprise. Not to mention them, even Wang Ling and the others who had watched the video material in advance were slightly excited. After all, this was the first time they had seen an armed helicopter in the reality of the red alert world. Wang Ling did not seduce the appetites of others. He directly used his power and ordered the armed helicopters to conduct a full army display. He even had some temporary defense measures set up to allow the armed helicopters to fly and deploy. Fire it up and test it out. After this test, the coalition forces became lively. The surprises expressed by Sun Dehu and others frequently appeared among these people. The soldiers in the entire base were talking about armed helicopters while they were on defense. Not only the coalition forces, but also the entire coalition forces saw the appearance and display of the armed helicopter. Different from the excitement of the coalition forces, this group of people had different thoughts. In the command post, General Reagan stared at the armed helicopter in the video with a somewhat unsightly look on his face. The coalition now has a flexible air force. Is this a good thing or a bad thing for our allies? Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 644. The Allied forces have become stronger. Is this a good thing or a bad thing for the Allied forces? This issue has actually become a commonplace topic within the Allied forces. Almost every commander has thought about it, but there has never been a definite conclusion. Previously, General Reagan still favored the latter. After all, he had witnessed with his own eyes how cunning and powerful Wang Ling was now. He asked himself, if the Allies had another battle with the coalition at this time, and if Wang Ling was not eliminated first, then the loser would be, most likely, the Allies. However, after experiencing a previous defeat, General Reagan personally experienced the difficulty of attacking Uri Base. As the coalition forces became stronger, they happened to be able to share some of the pressure on the Allies. From this aspect, the strength of the coalition seems to be a good thing for the Allies. After this back and forth, General Reagan became a little confused. As for what the Allied forces think, except for the commander-level figures within the coalition, others are too lazy to think about it, and Wang Ling doesn't want to worry about it. After the first armed helicopter was displayed, Wang Ling simply deployed it at the front line of defense to let the still hot soldiers have a close encounter, and then he himself was happy to be in peace. Since the advent of the first armed helicopter, the second, third, and fourth helicopters have also appeared one after another. Flying over the coalition base has a majestic feeling. However, after seeing the display of the first armed helicopter, the novelty of the armed helicopters among the officers and soldiers has gradually faded away. Subsequently, they saw so many armed helicopters appearing one after another, but they lost the excitement they had before. How to defend, without thinking too much. However, this is only the fourth one, and it is still far from the total number required by General Li Weiqi. The tank factory is always busy, and armed helicopters are flying out one after another. The sky above is also becoming more and more lively. Of course, after all, because the total quantity required is too large, even if we rush the work, we will not be able to complete it in an hour and a half, and even it will be difficult to complete the task in 1 or 2 days. During this period, Wang Ling and others were not in a hurry. After the ordering of troops was completed, they continued to defend according to the previous defense method for 2 days. In the past 2 days, other soldiers who had calmed down began to become excited again, because the number of armed helicopters was increasing, and one appeared every once in a while. By the third day, there were more than 20 armed helicopters hovering over the coalition forces. After being in contact for a long time, it will inevitably become a bit dull, but seeing this densely packed group of armed helicopters with your own eyes, the visual conflict is quite obvious, and a group of officers and soldiers are talking about it in private. Of course, with the advent of military technology for armed helicopters, it is not just the number one base in the Holy City war zone that has obtained the corresponding production technology. All coalition bases have obtained it, as long as they have production capabilities and have prerequisite buildings such as combat laboratories and tank factories. Bases can be built. Because of Wang Ling's presence, the coalition base in the Holy City Theater built too many armed helicopters, which itself took a lot of time. However, during this period, the coalition bases in other theaters have successively built many armed helicopters. Helicopters are used for exploration and combat. However, the results of these operations were not ideal. Some bases, just like the original Allied forces, built 5 armed helicopters and sent them out to attack Uri Base, but they were quickly destroyed by the Getter cannons of Uri Base. Some base commanders were more cunning. They hid outside the Uri Base, deployed armed helicopters, and used long-range cannons to bombard them. However, the corresponding Yuri base sent 2 mind control vehicles, which in the end controlled all the bases. Military helicopter. Relatively speaking, those coalition bases that deployed armed helicopters at the defense line were more stable. With the help of a longer range than the Prism tank, the shelling of Yuri's troops had some effect. However, when Yuri's troops jointly attacked with multiple arms, they also suffered a lot. Several magneto-electric tanks remotely attracted the deployed armed helicopters into the air, and were blown up by getter tanks. In the past 2 days, in order to test armed helicopters, similar battles have occurred frequently in other war zones. However, after these battles, many bases still cannot grasp the battlefield positioning of armed helicopters, and some commanders have even lost patience. I always felt that armed helicopters were useless, so I simply built 2 and hung them over the base as a backup, and then ignored them. In the past 2 days, Wang Ling had seen a lot of similar battles through electronic videos. Every time he saw the video of the defeat of the armed helicopter, he always felt regretful. But today, he had no energy to pay attention to the battle situation in other theaters, because after waiting for such a long time, the 25 armed helicopters at the coalition base in the Holy City Theater finally came alive. The armed helicopters are not small in size. These 25 helicopters are hovering over the base. What a spectacular sight it must be. Many officers and soldiers felt excited when they saw it, and some activists even whistled directly. After all, this scene was so eye-catching. Even the commander of the Allied base, General Reagan, saw this and his eyelids jumped. More than 20 aircraft were built in one go. Are the coalition forces crazy? It's hard to say whether the coalition forces were crazy or not. In short, the coalition forces were indeed shocked. 25, let's all work together. Wang Ling clenched his fists as he watched the last armed helicopter appear. Now that everything was ready, it was finally time to charge. Finally, after consulting General Li Wiki for instructions, Wang Ling called Chen Tong and his party, along with Sun Dehua, Niu Huang and other subordinates, a total of hundreds of mobilization troops, and got into the pre-arranged anti-aircraft tracked vehicle, and then dozens of Apocalypse tanks, Rhino tanks and Phantom tanks were assigned, together with 25 armed helicopters, to form the coalition's offensive force. After the assembly was completed, under Wang Ling's order, they set off in a hurry. Speaking of which, this is the 3rd time Wang Ling has led a team to attack Yuri's base. The first 2 attacks both resulted in the destruction of Yuri base. With these achievements, Wang Ling already has the title of victorious general in the hearts of many officers and soldiers in the base. In addition, this time with 25 armed helicopters of new types participating in the battle, it is naturally more eye-catching. In the Holy City area, officers and soldiers of both the Allied and coalition forces are paying attention to this battle. Even Wang Ling himself didn't know that General Li Wiki had been preparing to record the video from the beginning, intending to record the use of armed helicopters in detail through this battle and convey it to other theaters so that the coalition forces as a whole will take fewer detours. As for whether Wang Ling could skillfully command these armed helicopters, General Li Wiki had no doubt at all.